Before we begin, add your perspective in the comments. Is Stephanie White right to call out how Caitlin Clark's name is being used in every major debate around the WNBA? And does the league's leadership need to change course to protect its players and credibility? If you follow women's basketball, subscribe and turn on notifications for more reporting on the Indiana Fever, the WNBA's collective bargaining negotiations, officiating policy, player safety, and the business of a league at a crossroads. Stephanie White did not raise her voice. She did not deliver a rant. She sat for an interview and spoke with clarity about what many around the WNBA have whispered for months. "I hate all for Caitlin," the Indiana Fever head coach said. "She's a 23-year-old kid who loves to play this game, who is a pawn in a lot of other people's games and a lot of other people's narrative." The language was careful, the meaning unmistakable. White believes Caitlin Clark has been pulled into a storm of agendas, used by factions inside and outside the league in ways that distort the conversation and distract from the basketball. And she is not wrong. Clark's rookie year has been a crash course in fame as commodity. Every issue that matters in the WNBA, charter flights, the next collective bargaining agreement, salary structure, media rights, ratings growth, officiating consistency, even long simmering questions about leadership, has, at some point, been reframed with her at the center. Some of that is inevitable. Clark arrived as the most visible rookie women's basketball has ever produced, carrying a built-in national audience from Iowa, selling out arenas, and driving the largest viewership spikes in league history. But as White made clear, there is a difference between being a star and becoming the subject line of every press release, comment thread, and internal frustration. The timing of White's comments matters. The WNBA is in the noisy middle of a growth spurt. Attendance is up league-wide. National windows are producing ratings that surprised even optimistic executives. Media outlets that once ignored the regular season are now programming around it. With that attention have come sharper elbows on the floor and online, and a series of public spats that have overshadowed the game itself. Players want better pay and working conditions. Coaches want consistency and communication. Fans want the product they are promised. Against that backdrop, Caitlin Clark has become a stand-in for broader battles she did not start and does not control. White's words landed because of who she is and what she represents. She played in the WNBA when the league's first collective bargaining agreement was still finding its legs and basic benefits like year-round health insurance were not guaranteed. She has coached as the WNBA matured into a professionally marketed product with national partners, corporate sponsors, and a global audience. When she says, "We're experiencing growing pains," she's not delivering a platitude. She's describing the tension between a league on the cusp of mainstream status and an operation that hasn't fully aligned its policies, messaging, and leadership with that reality. The central critique in White's interview is straightforward. Caitlin Clark is being invoked in debates where she has said little or nothing, and she is being turned into a shorthand for every grievance and hope. Other players cite her name when arguing for a bigger share of revenue. League officials cite her impact when selling sponsorships. Networks mention her in promotional materials for games she isn't playing. Opponents are asked about her in pre- and post-game pressers, regardless of the result. Fans turn every call, every collision, every technical foul into a referendum on how she is treated. That isn't a healthy ecosystem for a rookie with an extraordinary playing load and a global spotlight. White's concern is also practical. Clark has taken consistent physical punishment on the floor. Nothing unprecedented by the standards of elite competition, but enough to generate a weekly conversation about officiating consistency and player safety. When obvious hard fouls go unpenalized, when illegal screens are missed, when contact above the shoulders is handled one way on a Tuesday and another on a Thursday, the immediate victim is the game. The longer-term casualty is trust. Coaches and players lose confidence in crews. Fans lose confidence in outcomes. White is not asking for special rules. She's asking for predictable ones. That is where leadership enters the frame. The WNBA is negotiating the line between entertainment product and competitive integrity in real time. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert has steered major business wins, expansion media deals, better travel for certain stretches, and broader corporate partnerships. But the public messaging around player concerns has too often sounded clinical and defensive. When Link star Nafisa Collier charged that leadership was out of step with players and alleged that the commissioner had said Clark should be grateful for the platform the WNBA provides, the response was a sterile statement about mischaracterization. When coaches like Becky Hammon and Stephanie White called for more accountability around officiating, the league offered vague commitments while issuing fines or remarks that were more measured and inflammatory. None of this means Engelbert is the villain in a simple drama. Running a league in a growth phase is hard. Curbing emotion in public statements can be the right instinct, but the pattern that White and others are indirectly pointing to is that the WNBA's executive voice sounds detached from the lived reality of its players and coaches. When they say leadership must reflect where we are, they're not asking for spin. They're asking for connection, a willingness to speak plainly about problems, to share timelines and benchmarks, and to stand up for stars when they're targeted online or roughed up in ways that cross the line. The tension is not just about tone. It is about using the success that Clark and her peers have generated to build systems that endure. Charter travel remains limited in ways that look increasingly archaic to new fans who assume top-tier athletes don't spend hours in commercial terminals between back-to-backs. Player salaries at the top end are still dwarfed by their NBA counterparts, even as some WNBA games post comparative ratings. Officials, most of whom are part-time and juggling assignments, need more robust training, evaluation, and full-time pathways. A player advisory council with real access to the commissioner's office and real weight in policy formation would do more to rebuild trust than any marketing campaign. The Fever coach also offered a reminder many fans need to hear. Clark has not tried to dictate the narrative. When asked directly about Collier's comments, she said only that she had great respect for her and that the player raised valid points. She has not lobbied for special treatment. She has not leaned into culture wars. She has absorbed criticism, fouls, and invasive commentary with the consistent poise of a veteran, even as she learns the pro game on the fly. It is not the job of a 23-year-old to hold together a league's political contradictions. That is on leadership. White's larger point about growing pains is worth unpacking. Every major league has lived through uncomfortable adolescence. The NBA of the 1970s struggled with attendance and image before television money, and stars like Magic and Bird changed its trajectory. The NFL had to address players' safety with substantive rule changes and investments after dragging its feet. Major League Baseball still cycles through labor disputes and pace-of-play crises. The WNBA is no different. It has extraordinary momentum and real internal challenges. The difference between organizations that mature and those that stall is how they confront their stress points. Right now, the WNBA has to decide whether it wants to be proactive or reactive about officiating, player safety, travel, and communications. The officiating piece remains the most urgent for basketball reasons. Consistency in how contact is called, clarity about flagrant thresholds, and transparency about post-game reviews would immediately quiet a significant portion of the noise. A public summary after certain controversial games, similar to the NBA's last 2-minute reports but tailored to the WNBA schedule, would give coaches and fans a point of reference. A pilot program for full-time officials, with higher pay and year-round training, would allow the league to build a pool of referees who treat the job as primary, not secondary. Communication is the next priority. When the commissioner's office anticipates flashpoints, such as policy announcements, scheduling, or discipline, it should pre-brief teams and player representatives to reduce confusion. When the league makes a player safety statement, it should tie it to concrete steps. When fines are imposed, explain the standards. Silence or generic lines about disappointment. In a season this loud read as evasion, White's insistence that the league now reflect where it is does not mean surrendering standards for expedience. It means aligning policies with reality. When players like Clark and Angel Reese draw millions of new viewers, that is not a threat to WNBA's identity. It is its opportunity. When Aya Wilson and Breanna Stewart showcase sustained excellence, that is not a challenge to marketing. It is a foundation for it. When a coach like White, whose job depends on working with the league, says out loud that its biggest star is being used, the question is not how to manage the optics. It is how to change the behavior. There's a cautionary note in all of this. Fans can and do lose patience when an organization appears to value narratives over substance. If they sense that a league will lean on its most marketable figure to distract from its failures, they will tune out. The fever around Clark's rookie year is an enormous advantage. It is also fragile. The surest way to squander it is to treat her as a marketing strategy rather than a player who needs the same protections and standards as everyone else. White's empathy for a guard is not the product of fandom. It is the awareness of a coach who sees that the person standing at the center of every highlight package is also the person absorbing an inordinate share of scrutiny and force. None of this absolves the media from responsibility. Journalists should resist the reflex to drive every segment or headline with Clark's name, unless it is truly central to the topic. There are 12 teams and a deep roster of compelling players in this league. There are coaches with real ideas. There are executives making consequential decisions. There are games worth analyzing for their schemes and adjustments. If the daily conversation is Caitlin Clark, and even when the end has nothing to do with her, the ecosystem closes around a single oxygen source. No league thrives that way. White's steady tone in the interview is, itself, a form of leadership. She did not denigrate colleagues. She did not inflame a partisan divide. She laid out what Indiana has lived and what the league must face. She called Clark a pawn, not to provoke a headline, but to caution stakeholders who have forgotten that public figures are also people who feel the drag of narratives they did not write. She framed the moment as a test rather than a verdict. And she located the stakes not in social media skirmishes or press room sound bites, but in the practical question of whether the WNBA will be known more for the product on the floor or the fight surrounding it. The calculus from here is simple. If the league wants to capitalize on unprecedented interest, it must professionalize the parts of its operation that cannot be held together by enthusiasm. If it wants to honor the athletes who built this moment, it must listen to them with an ear for action, not just acknowledgement. If it wants to protect its biggest star without alienating others, it must stop treating her as a proxy in every argument and a shield in every crisis. That is what Stephanie White is saying, couched in the language of care for a 23-year-old who just wants to hoop. So where should the WNBA go from here? Officiating standards should be published and taught with consistency. Players' safety guidelines should be enforced proactively, not reactively. Communications from the Commissioner's office should be specific, transparent, and grounded in respect for coaches and players. The next CBA should reflect the value players have created, with charter travel and salary bands aligned to the league's growth and new media deals. And the daily conversation on broadcasts and pressers and across digital platforms should center the basketball. The product has never been better. The leadership has to rise to meet it. What do you think Stephanie White's comments reveal about the WNBA's leadership and the pressure on Caitlin Clark? Should the league create a formal player advisory council, overhaul officiating, and recalibrate how it uses stars in policy debates? Share your perspective below. If you want more coverage that separates heat from light on the WNBA's growth, Caitlin Clark's role, the Indiana Fever season, and the business side of women's basketball, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next report.